So good to have all of you with us in worship today, and I just want to extend an invitation. I'm not trying to get you to join a church if you belong to a church, but if you don't have a church home, we invite you to come and continue to worship with us this week. We'd love for you to be blessed this entire week through. When I was in college, back in the 70s, even the early 70s, I attended a Lutheran campus church. And the congregation decided to repaint the inside of the sanctuary because it needed it. Frankly, it just was. It wasn't off-white, but it was bright and cheery. And so when they announced that they were going to repaint the sanctuary, you kind of expected that it was going to look the same, just with a fresh coat of paint. Except whoever made the decision decided that instead of this bright, warm off-white, that they were going to paint the church a dark shade of pastel green. And it changed the room. I mean, it was not so bright in there anymore. And it changed because of the color of the wall. It changed the mood in the room as well. Now, a couple of the townies, and townies were the people that college students affectionately called the adults who weren't in college, who lived in town, who still attended the campus church. And a couple of the townies went to Pastor Bodecker, the pastor, and they said, "Pastor, we can't worship here any longer, not with the walls that color." And it raises a very real question, doesn't it? I mean, what's real worship about? Does the color of walls, is that on a person's short list of what makes worship worship? I mean, we all have preferences, and some of us are green people, and I suspect those that made the decision about what color to paint the sanctuary at University Chapel back in Whitewater, Wisconsin, were green people. I don't happen to be one of those, but there are green people. But to decide that I can't worship because of the color a wall's painted? So I'm curious, and I'm not going to ask you to report, but in your own mental list, what is essential for you for real worship to happen? What do you need? What do you think that's supposed to be there? What can you say, when I've done these things, or this is true, then I've really worshiped? What's on your list? In John chapter 4, Jesus meets a Samaritan woman by Jacob's well, and while there is a great deal of conversation that goes between Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well, covers about roughly 2 chapters of the Gospel of John, within that conversation is a dialogue that Jesus has with her about what true and real and authentic worship looks like. Now let me give you a background so you can understand the woman's question. Samaritans were descendants of Israelites who, after the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC, they were those who remained and intermarried with the other pagan cultures that the Assyrians, who had conquered their nations as well, resettled there, because that was their idea. Make sure we take all the intelligent people and educated people, we displace them into a foreign country where they don't speak the language. A lot tougher to rise up and revolt if you're in a strange land with a strange tongue that you've got to learn before you can even do anything else. So if you were a conquering nation, that wasn't a bad strategy. And so, yet the Bible had said that you don't intermarry. If you're one of the children of Israel, you don't intermarry with other people that were not followers of God. So, despite this fact of violating that command, Samaritans asserted, however, that their worship was the only true worship because it was the ancient original worship before the Babylonian captivity, where the southern kingdom got taken for 70 years. After all, Jacob's well was at the foot of Mount Gerizim. That's where they said and maintain, even to this day, that Abraham was to offer Isaac, his son, before God. That Mount Gerizim was the Moriah of the book of Genesis. Furthermore, they only used the first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Torah, the Pentateuch. So we have the original. We are the original. And if you will worship truly the true God, then you will be like us and worship here on this mountain in this way. Now the Jews, on the other hand, especially after David brings the ark into Jerusalem, The only true worship of God is before the presence of God, and that's at the Ark of the Covenant, and that's in the temple in Jerusalem. If you really want to worship God, then you must come to Jerusalem. It's mandated 3 times a year. It's right there in the book of Leviticus. Come on, or you're no godly person at all. So in that day, when this Samaritan woman asked the question of Jesus, when we think about the question, what's true or genuine worship, the question in her mind is where? And she sees that Jesus, she assumes at first that he's a prophet, and she says, Sir, I see that you're a prophet. So she says, well, I might as well take advantage of the opportunity. And here's this burning question, and so she says, our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is in Jerusalem. In other words, her big question was, where does one rightly worship? And it's a question that's not uncommonly asked even in our modern day. I mean, if you're somebody that's in church regularly, and you see somebody else you know from church who hasn't been in church for a while, and you try to encourage them, it's not uncommon to hear some people say something like this: can't I worship God anywhere I am? I feel closer to God in my boat on a lake fishing than I do in church, or hiking in the woods. Can't I worship God there? Here's how Jesus answered the question. Yet a time is coming when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers that the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth. Real worship, genuine, authentic worship before God is not answered by asking the question where. It's answered by asking the question how. What does real and authentic worship look like at its very heart and very core and its very foundation? It's worshiping God in spirit and in truth. What does that mean? What does that look like? If that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Because, people today, they talk about being spiritual, whatever that means. Does that mean you just think spiritual thoughts that are not earthly? Is that what it's talking about? When you look in the Bible, how it uses the word spirit, and referring to us, it usually is referring to us as a person, a being who has body and spirit, or body, soul, and spirit. Your spirit then, and or your soul, is the very essence of who you really are. Your body is basically like clothing, your physical body. You wear it till it wears out, but you're still an eternal being that God has created, that goes on living. The only real question, by the way, is after you die is not will you live, but where you live. And so to worship God in spirit, if our spirit is the essence of who we really are, then it would seem to me that it would imply that worshiping God in spirit is to put your whole self into it. All of me offered up to God, whether I'm singing, praying, in my daily devotions, or I'm serving someone else in Jesus' name, that is this act of giving myself out of love for God to love God. That is the very essence of what worship is. It's a mistake that Old Testament worshipers ran into every now and then when they couldn't figure out why God was upset with them. Because the responses the prophets record is essentially this: God, we've done what you asked us to do in the Old Testament here. You said you want these sacrifices, we performed these sacrifices. We've gone through the motions, we've done all the rituals. What's your beef? What's your complaint? You said do this, we've done it. And God's basic answer is your heart's not there. You're not in it. What does David say that what God looks for? A broken and contrite spirit. Without that, the Old Testament sacrifice meant nothing. Let me illustrate this for you in a way that hopefully that'll make it a little more sense to you. Imagine in your family when we say things that we know we're supposed to say, but we don't always mean it. We don't put ourselves into it. Like let's say, Miles, you and I are in the same family, and so brothers fight, right? Like brothers and sisters. I'm sure you and your sister don't fight, but just humor me. So I'm the older brother, of course, because I'm a couple years older than you are. And so I'm waiting for you to walk around the corner. And what do bigger brothers do? They tend to pick on their little brothers, right? So when you're not looking, I smack you alongside the back of your head. Bam! And I'm laughing because you never saw it coming, right?